Hi, I'm Elysiana, and you're listening to my dad, Jeremy Paris. He helps veterans.
Welcome to Veteran Resource Podcast, where you will meet nonprofit organizations focused on improving the lives of veterans and their family members. Here is your host, Jeremy Paris.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 7 of the Veteran Resource Podcast. As you just heard my daughter tell you, my name is Jeremy Paris, and today's guest is going to be Vanessa Daley from the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, also known as TAPS. I'm going to let Vanessa tell you all about the great things that TAPS has going on to help survivors, but one of the items that she's going to bring up is the Good Grief Camp going on this Memorial Day weekend in Washington, D.C. They're going to have about 500 survivors, 500 children who are survivors of fallen heroes coming out for this camp. And TAPS still needs about 150 more mentors for this event. So if you would like to be a mentor, I'm going to have a nice big link in the show notes that will take you to the registration form where you can sign up. But make sure that you go there right now and sign up, because from the time that this podcast airs, there's only about a week or so that you still have left to sign up. So make sure you follow the link. The show notes are going to be at veteranpodcast.com/007. Last week, I said that I was going to be reading a few of the reviews at the beginning of each episode. So I'm going to start out right now with Bree Noble, who says, "What a cool resource for veterans. Jeremy is passionate about his niche and wants to give back to the industry that has helped and inspired him. His passion comes through in his interviews with interesting guests." And Jay Pierstoff says, "Wow, a fantastic source of veteran resources, institutions, companies, organizations, and more. Jeremy rocks this. Can't wait to hear more." And Shaolin Soprano says, "So glad to find the show. It's so inspiring, regardless if you're a veteran or not. Love it, 5 stars. And the Shaolin Soprano also gave me a sideways smiley face to boot. Thank you so much, everybody." If you have not left a review yet, I invite you to go to iTunes. Under Veteran Resource Podcast, you'll click on the Ratings and Reviews tab, and it's very easy for you to leave a quick review. Thank you so much. Vanessa Daley is the project manager of TAPS Youth Programs. She is the surviving daughter of Sergeant First Class Dan H Gabrielson, an Army Reservist with more than 20 years of service, who was killed in action 9 July 2003 in Baqubah, Iraq. At the time, Vanessa was a student at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay, studying elementary education with an emphasis on early childhood. In 2005, Vanessa volunteered as a mentor at the TAPS Good Grief Camp in Washington, D.C. It was during those 5 days that she fell in love with the mission of TAPS and realized just how much she missed that military connection. For the next 3 years, Vanessa would continue to volunteer even after taking a second-grade teaching position in the same town that her father worked in for 20 years. Vanessa joined TAPS full-time in 2008, moving to Fort Hood to work more closely with military families. In 2009, Vanessa helped the Army to launch its Survivor Outreach Services program and set up the first regional TAPS office on a military installation, which just happened to be across from the 4ID Memorial, a wall on which her father is memorialized. Vanessa moved to Fort Bliss in 2011 with her husband David, a soldier whom she met at Fort Hood, and began providing support to survivors there, setting up another regional TAPS office and working closely with the Fort Bliss Survivor Outreach Services. Originally from Northwestern Wisconsin, Vanessa and her husband just bought their first home up north and plan to raise their girls close to family. Let's jump right into the interview with Vanessa. Vanessa, welcome to the Veteran Resource Podcast. Pretty excited to have you on today.
Thanks for having me.
Vanessa, I wanted to find out a little bit more about you, but before we do, can you give a brief description of what TAPS is?
TAPS is the nation's leading nonprofit military service organization providing immediate and long-term care to families of the fallen, regardless of circumstance or geography. It could be, an accident here in the States, an automobile accident, terminal illness, or it could be, overseas while deployed.
Okay. We are definitely going to get into a little bit more on that. But before we do, I wanted to find out a little bit more about you. Can you tell me a little bit about you growing up? Maybe what life was like when you were in Northwest Wisconsin, was it?
Yeah, I'm from Wisconsin. I'm a cheesehead. Yeah, I was born and raised in Northwest Wisconsin. My parents were high school sweethearts. They had me when they were really young, and we grew up in the country on 80 acres. We have a river that ran through our front yard, and it was good. I was the oldest of 3 kids. I have a sister who's 3 years younger than me and a brother who's 4 years younger than her. Grew up in a teeny tiny little town of 1,100 people. My graduating class was 38 kids. So yeah, when I say it's the middle of nowhere, that's what it is. But I loved it. I wouldn't have changed a thing.
Vanessa, your father, Sergeant First Class Dan Gabrielson, he was an Army Reservist for over 20 years. You mind telling us a little bit about him?
Yeah, his parents actually signed saying that he could go to basic training when he was 17. So he did the first part of basic when he was 17 and did his AIT the next summer when he was 18. And for 22 plus years, he was an Army Reservist doing his AIT every summer and his 1 weekend a month. And he loved it. He loved the training. He just loved everything about it. He was in an engineering unit, the 652nd Engineer Company out of Ellsworth, Wisconsin. He was a math guy. He was really, really smart. I didn't get that from him, unfortunately. There were many nights that we would sit down and go over algebra homework, and we both went to bed crying. It was such a struggle. But he was just really, really smart, really intelligent. He went to different technical colleges and got his degree in computer programming. So that was his civilian job. And once a month, he would go off and play soldier for the weekend. And we thought it was the greatest thing ever. We loved when he would go on his AIT. He'd bring home his MREs because he couldn't stand them. But we thought that it was like Christmas. He would bring 2 weeks worth of MREs home. And we just thought it was the greatest thing. So it's so funny thinking back to what we thought was great. But we didn't know any different. And he never deployed. He did get to go a couple times. They went to Guatemala for 2 weeks and did a bridging training down there. And then they went to Panama a couple years later and did some work down there on the Panama Canal. But no deployments, no action or anything like that. It was more training exercises that he did.
And then he was killed in action in July of 2003 in Iraq, correct?
Yeah. I remember, 9/11. I was a freshman at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. And I remember getting ready for classes. I had just been there about 2 weeks. My first year of college, I had moved 5 hours away from my family that I was really, really close to. And I just remember thinking, what does this mean? And the first person I called was my dad. And I told him, I said, what do we do now? It was really scary. And I remember he said, don't go into the library. And I said, what? And he said, don't go into the library. It's the tallest building in Green Bay, which some people would think is the worst thing that you would ever tell anybody. But that was just my dad. He kind of, that little bit of humor to kind of cut the tension that I was feeling. And it just made me laugh, and it kind of eased my fears a little bit. But fast forward a couple years, and it was, I was home on Christmas break, and in 2002, so a year later, and I remember my dad, before he left to work, he caught me before he walked out the door and said, just so you know, they're talking about deploying us. And I remember it was kind of like everything stopped. And I thought, wow, this is serious. And so a couple months later, I want to say it was February, they went to Fort McCoy, which is in Wisconsin. His unit did, and they started training, and they trained there for about 2 months. They deployed in April, right around Easter, I want to say. And they weren't even there 2 months, and he was in a convoy. Part of their unit was at one camp, and the other half of the unit was at another camp. And so at the end of the day, they would travel to one centralized location, and they would meet and share notes or whatever it is that they do at the end of the day. And then they would travel back to where they came from. And my dad was in the Humvee at the end of the convoy, and they took fire from an RPG. It entered into the passenger side of the vehicle where my dad was sitting, and he was killed instantly. The driver was thrown. The two guys in the back just had some minor scrapes and burns. So it was really intense. It turned our whole world upside down.
I couldn't imagine.
And yeah, the next day we got that knock on the door that nobody wants to get. And when you grow up and your dad's, a reservist, you don't really live that. I wasn't a military brat. I didn't live it every day. It wasn't on my radar. I definitely wasn't expecting anything like this to happen. I figured he would go, he would do what he was, trained to do, and he would be back, in a year. And so it just really rocked our world.
And was it at this point that you came in contact with TAPS, or was that sometime later?
It wasn't for about 2 years. My mom actually had gotten in contact with another widow from Wisconsin who was interested in going to see the unveiling of the Faces of the Fallen. It was an exhibit in Washington, D.C. They had gotten artists from all over the U.S. to paint portraits of our fallen service members, and they were on display in D.C. And so this other widow from Wisconsin just contacted my mom out of the blue, and my mom said, should I go? And I said, go. She'd never been on a plane before, hardly ever been out of state. And I said, just go. And so she went with somebody she'd never met before. And I truly believe that everything happens for a reason. And for me, that was another life-changing moment. My mom went to the unveiling. She went to a luncheon afterwards and ended up sitting next to Bonnie Carroll, who's the founder of TAPS. And so was sitting next to Bonnie, and Bonnie asked her, who she was, where she was from. And my mom was telling her about, our life in Wisconsin and my dad, and mentioned that I had was going to school, actually, to be a teacher. And Bonnie said, oh my gosh, it's serendipity, which is one of my favorite words. And so she said she needs to come and be a mentor at our Good Grief camp. She would be perfect. My mom called me and told me, and at the time I was still in school, and I thought, this is fantastic. I didn't even have to be talked into it. I just, when is my flight? How do I get there? And so that was my first experience with TAPS. Was I went out there to be a mentor, to work with the children of the fallen. I was 21 at the time. So I was too old for the Good Grief camp. And to be totally honest, I probably wouldn't have gone anyways. That just wasn't me, to go and sit in a circle and talk about my feelings. But to go and help other kids, that was right up my alley. So that was how I got involved in TAPS in the first place.
That is an amazing chain of events that brought you to TAPS. The fact that your mother, who never had flown before, decided to fly with somebody that she didn't even know,
right?
And went, and then ends up sitting next to Bonnie Carroll, who's the founder of TAPS. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where, I really believe that everything happens for a reason. I don't know why it happens, but I know there's some reason behind it. And it was just, that was meant to be. That was my path. I just know it.
And I was reading a little bit on the website, and I saw that the National Military Survivor Seminar has been held annually since 1994. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, we just celebrated our 20th anniversary last year. TAPS was founded in 1994 by Bonnie Carroll. Her husband was the adjutant general of the Alaskan National Guard. And in 1992, him and the rest of the men on his airplane crashed. It was a high-ranking officials were on the plane. I think it was bad weather, and the plane crashed. And Bonnie realized that all of the other service organizations out there, the police force, fire departments, those sort of organizations had programs out there in place to help families after they'd lost a loved one doing their jobs. And there was nothing out there for military families, and she just couldn't believe it. And so she thought, for her, the wife of a general, to not have the support. What happened to the families who weren't, officers or weren't higher ranking and didn't have any of the extra supports that she had as the wife of a high ranking officer? And so it really just started out of her and the other spouses of the surviving family members of those men that were killed on that airplane getting together around a kitchen table. It was really a grassroots startup. And so that's how it began. And it started around a kitchen table. And after a couple of years, she said, let's go to Washington, D.C. Let's visit the memorials. Let's, get together there. And so that's how it started. The first year was they gathered in Washington, D.C. By that time, they had some other military families that joined them. So 1994 was the first year that we did the National Military Survivor Seminar in DC. And then a couple of years later, they realized, we're doing things for ourselves, for the adults, but what about the kids? We need to do something for the kids. And that's when the Good Grief Camp started. And it started out with, that was before my time, but the story goes that there were, just a handful of kids, maybe a couple dozen or so. And now this year we had to shut down registration almost 3 weeks ago because we reached 500 kids. So it's just,
wow.
It's just, it's gotten so big. And I hate that it's gotten so big, but I'm glad that we're there for these kids.
The need is there.
Yeah. Yep.
And I really wanted to dig in more about the Good Grief Camp. Can you kind of go over exactly what it is?
Sure. The Good Grief Camp is for children ages 4 to 19. And what makes our Good Grief Camp so unique are the military mentors, active duty, recently separated men and women who have served their country or are serving their country, who are matched with each of the kids. So every child gets a military mentor, sort of like the Big Brother, Big Sister programs that you've seen in other organizations. That's the idea behind it. So the kids come and they're separated out into age groups, sort of like classroom age groups would be. And each group is run by somebody who's been trained to be a grief facilitator. And we do a lot of activities. It's not, sitting around in a circle and sharing our story and crying and being sad and all of that. It's, there's a little piece of that. There has to be a piece of that because that's why we're all there.
Right.
But it's so much more than that. It's learning to laugh again and knowing that that's okay. And we don't have to feel guilty about that. And it's about knowing that even though they've lost the loved one who served in the military, they haven't lost that connection. And so having that military mentor with them throughout the weekend is so important because so many of these kids, and even myself, I didn't realize that how much I missed that connection to the military, seeing somebody in a uniform, hearing, taps or seeing the flag or, just those things that when you see it, the first thing you think of is our men and women who serve in our armed forces. And so for these kids to know that the military has not forgotten them, that somebody in the armed forces has given up their whole weekend to be, a shoulder to cry on, somebody to laugh with, somebody who wants to hear stories about their dad. And, some of these kids weren't even born yet when their parents died, or they were really, really young and don't have any firsthand memories. And they just want to know. They want to know about the military. If their dad was a crew chief, what did my dad do? My mom's told me some stories, but what else do crew chiefs do? And that's part of what we try to do. In addition to just giving them a mentor for the weekend, is we really try to match them up with somebody who serves in the same branch of service as their loved one did. It gets to be a little bit difficult. We can't always do that. But if there's a kid that really, the parents fill out an intake form and they give us some background history on the child. And if we can see that this kid he is gung-ho about, Air Force aviation and the F-16s, we will go out of our way to see if there's a mentor there, who flies F-16s or something like that, or drives the Bradleys, anything like that the parents, lay out for us. We really try to make those connections, because for some of these kids, that's all they have.
Right. It sounds like a really good program, and this was the first program that you were introduced in TAPS. You started off by being a mentor at the Good Grief Camp, correct?
Yeah. My first year was in 2005 as a Good Grief Camp mentor, and I did that for several years. I graduated from the University of Wisconsin Green Bay, and I taught for a year, and on weekends I would travel to our regional Good Grief camps. Our program in DC has gotten so big that I want to say back in 2006 or 2007, we started doing regional programs, which are shorter events. It's Friday evening, the families arrive, and then we have a day of workshops and grief work for the children. And then on Sunday, we usually do a fun activity and they head home. So we started doing those because it's so expensive for families to get to Washington, D.C., even though most of the events and everything are covered by TAPS. It's still expensive for them. Airfare, lodging, it gets really expensive, and not all families can afford that. And so the way we remedied that was by taking the show on the road. So we go at least once a month and we do a regional seminar somewhere across the USA.
That's great.
Yeah. So that's what I started doing, and I was teaching at the same time, and they invited me to come out and help facilitate the Good Grief camps, not just be a mentor. And I did that for a year, and it just got to be too much. I decided I either needed to teach or do TAPS. And so I put in my resignation and quit my dream job. And I picked up and I moved to Fort Hood, Texas, which was a long ways from the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin. So I moved in 2008, and it has just been a wild ride. So
when you were mentoring these children, did you notice a difference from the time that you met them to the time that they were leaving to go back home?
It's interesting. Some kids you can see in the matter of a couple days them open up. Mm-hmm. Other kids, they leave at the end of the weekend and you think, did I really make a difference? And it took me a while to see how the different kids really worked through their grief in different ways, just like, us adults do. Even in my own family, I grieved in a totally different way than my sister did. And so it's really interesting. We've had children before that, their first time at camp, they don't say anything. We're lucky if they say their name, especially with the little ones. They're shy. They're not quite sure what's going on. And a lot of times, the only way to get them to share is for them to whisper into the ear of their mentor. My background is in elementary education, so I just love the little ones, and I work with the 4 to 7 year olds usually. And so more times than not, as we're going around our circle and doing introductions in that first morning, most of my little ones, a lot of times I say, can you whisper in your mentor's ear? And then the mentor repeats it for them. So it's just from that very beginning, the mentors really get a sense of what an important role they play in allowing those kids to share in a way that works for them, that feels safe to them. And it's really about creating an environment for these kids in which they feel safe. They feel like they're not being judged. And that's really, really important for these kids.
And do these bonds that the mentors are getting with the children, do they continue on after the program?
They do. We've had kids who've had the same mentor for years and years now. I started out in 2005, and this year, one of the girls that was in my very first group, she graduated last May from high school, and she's just finishing up her first year at Radford University. And she's had the same mentor for the last, I want to say like 6-7 years. And they're inseparable. They're like family. It's like great. The sister that she never had. And there's so many stories like that. That's just one of, hundreds. So that's the idea, is that, after this 3 or 4 day TAPS camp, that these mentors stay in contact with the child that they've been matched up with. And it may be, that it's just sending a card on their birthday or the anniversary of their dad's death. It could be as simple as that. For some of them, if geographically, if they live in the same area, it may be, going to their soccer games every fall, or maybe, making an appearance at their birthday party or something like that. So it just depends on, where the family lives, where the mentor lives. And the most difficult thing is that most of our mentors are active duty. And we all know you're only in one place so long.
Right.
So that does prove to be a little bit difficult. But like I said, we've had so many stories where, after, several years, they're still in contact, and they really are making a lifelong impact on these kids. And even if it doesn't go that far, even if it's only for that one weekend and they really don't continue that relationship after that time, at least for those 3 days, they felt and knew that they were still a part of that military family, and that this person had given up their whole weekend to spend with them, which in this day and age, that doesn't happen a lot.
Yeah, I love that. And so for the Good Grief Camp, you have an event coming up really soon here in DC, correct?
We do, yes. It's our 21st annual National Survivor Seminar and Good Grief Camp. It's over Memorial Day weekend. It's the same weekend every year. And right now we have 700 adults registered and 474 kids registered.
Incredible.
Yeah. So it's just, people look at those numbers and say, how do you do it? And it's a lot of planning, and just most of our staff are survivors as well. And so we all really just, have bought into it because we've been there. We've been walking in the same shoes as so many of these survivors for the last, decade, if not longer. And so it's just, we all really, have a heart for these families, and we know what they're going through. So our numbers are big, our hearts are big, and we just hope that, the people that come to our events, they walk away at the end of this feeling a little bit more hopeful about their future, knowing that their loved one's sacrifice has not been forgotten, and that the kids, especially, that they've enjoyed this time with their mentor, and they've gotten to laugh, and they've gotten that one-on-one attention that sometimes can be really difficult for a mom who finds herself raising 3 kids alone, and on top of that, grieving the death of her best friend. So that's, our numbers are big, and we need lots of mentors.
Well, it's funny that it seems as though this is very beneficial, obviously, for the survivors, but it seems also that it's very beneficial for the mentors.
It is. I'm so glad you brought that up because we have had so many amazing stories come out of our mentors over the years. We've had wives actually call into our 1-800 number and say, my husband was a mentor at your camp over the weekend, and he came home and he was a changed man. He talked for the first time about the experiences that he had while he was deployed. He told me about, his battle buddy who, he carried from, his Humvee that had been hit by an IED, into the medevac helicopter, things that they've never shared before. And so it's really, it's just the whole thing is just, it's life-changing. If you're a part of it, it's life-changing, not only for the families, but for the mentors. And we've had mentors before that have told us, at the end of the weekend that they feel guilty because they feel as though they've gotten more out of the weekend than they were able to give to the kids. And that's powerful. That's powerful. It really, really is powerful.
It is. Do you have all of the mentors that you need for this upcoming event?
We don't. We have been recruiting since January when registration opened, and we are sitting right now at about 335 mentors. So we are still, the magic number every year is 500. If we can have 500 mentors, because, you always get some that need to cancel at the last second, or they get put on orders and they're TDY, or, all of a sudden they're deploying, or they've got a family emergency. And then you've always got some no-shows too. So we're still looking for about 150 more mentors to be sitting in a place where we feel pretty confident that every one of our kids who's registered will get their own mentor. And we've not met our quota in the past. We've had to do a few times where our teenagers, every teenager or every mentor is matched up with 2 kids in the older age groups. And that works. But ideally, we would love to have a mentor for each child.
And who could be a mentor?
Our mentors are local to the DC area. They don't have to be active duty. We also accept veterans who are recently separated. We prefer post 9/11. Okay. But really, if you have served in the armed forces, and it was even previous to 9/11, that's okay. It's a long weekend. There's a lot of walking. If you're matched with some of the younger kiddos, it's rock and roll time. You don't have you don't have to be young, but you have to be young at heart. And so many of one of our mentors, he's more mature than some of the other ones, let's just say. And he said, he goes, you really should put in the small print at the bottom, young at heart and young knees too, he said, because my knees just can't take this. So, active duty, those who are recently separated veterans. And we've even had some civilian Department of Defense contractors come out and work with us. That's on a case-by-case basis, but oftentimes, they've deployed or they've been overseas with these deployed soldiers. I know this year specifically, I had somebody reach out and say that she wasn't active duty, she wasn't a veteran, but she was a DoD contractor, and she deployed with a certain soldier, and his children are registered to attend this year. And the wife had reached out to her and said, we're coming to DC. They'd kept in contact over the years. She said, we're coming to DC, and it would be really neat if you could be a mentor and work with one of the 3 kids. So we actually made an exception in her case, and she's going to be a mentor this year, and she's going to work with one of these kids. And she was over there. She worked a couple 100 days with their dad before he passed away over there. So it's going to be really, really special for them. She's going to have stories and things that these kids have never heard. So
I bet.
There are definitely exceptions to the rule.
And for the people that are not military, they're not civilians, but they still want to help out, is there still something that they could be doing? They're all in for this event. They really want to support it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have, it looks like 1,200 children and their parents coming out for this. And so that's a lot of people. That's a lot of moving parts. That's a lot of setup. That's a lot of tear down. It's a lot of being organized. So we have a volunteer program at TAPS, and we have registration online. They can sign up to be a volunteer. Jerome Tennille is our volunteer coordinator, and he reaches out to folks. He sends folks an email, and there's certain projects that we need help with. And he reaches out to them and lets them know what projects they are, what days they are, what times they are. So anybody that's not active duty, but, really has a heart for helping these families, there are so many things that we have to do to get ready for this event and throughout the weekend, behind the scenes work, but it's what makes the magic happen. Without those helping hands, we wouldn't be able to do it on our own. So there are definitely opportunities for folks to help out behind the scenes.
Great. And Vanessa, I will make sure that I put links to the places where you can register in the show notes so that people can find them more quickly.
Great.
And okay, so aside from the Good Grief Camp, what other programs does TAPS have going on?
TAPS has all kinds of services that we provide the families in addition to the seminars and Good Grief Camps that we have. Like I said, our services are for those who have lost a loved one, regardless of circumstance or geography, and also relationship. A lot of the armed forces branches, they don't recognize, fiancés, girlfriends. TAPS, there's no list of, requirements to be a survivor. If you loved somebody who served and they have passed away, then we're here for you. So we have a 24-hour hotline that folks can call. It's 1-800-959-TAPS. And it's answered 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, holidays, middle of the night, anytime that our folks need help. And that's, people who have just gotten the knock on the door. It's people that it's been 8 or 9 years since they lost their loved one, but they're just now hearing of us. It could be somebody who's having a problem getting the benefits that their loved one had signed up for. All different kinds of things. And or it could just be, folks that work with these military families, people in the school districts that just want to call and say, we've got this family. How can we help them? Is there information that we can pass along to them? So we get all kinds of calls into that hotline. We also have an online community. A lot of our families, like I said, they don't have the money to travel to our events, or they don't live near one of our regional seminars. But for people to go online and do like an online chat, it's really, for some people, hiding behind that computer screen where they can kind of be anonymous is really powerful for them. And so our online community is huge. We have dedicated chats every month for widows specifically, for parents specifically, for suicide survivors specifically. So those are a really big hit with so many of our survivors because it's safe. There's no face to their name necessarily, and they can sit back and they can read what everybody else is contributing. And they don't have to say a thing, but a lot of times it's just knowing that you're not alone in the thoughts and feelings that are going through your head and your heart. And so it's really, really nice to sit there and realize that you're not alone, that other people are feeling the exact same way that you are. And even more importantly, that there are people that have felt that way, but they can show you the light at the end of the tunnel. So our online community is huge. We have care teams set up all over the U.S., which are groups that meet once a month. It's sort of like a care group that you might see, at a local church or something in your communities, where survivors come together from all different experiences. But what we found with many of our families that went to those sort of groups was that, for instance, a lot of the widows were, in their 60s and 70s, and their loved ones had long lives and, had a heart attack in their sleep. And that is so far from the experience that a lot of our survivors have had. And so they didn't really it wasn't the kind of support that they needed. And so we started developing these care teams, and we have them all over the U.S. now. Actually, the one in Wisconsin I just heard today, we just started it within the last, I want to say, 8-9 months. And it's already gotten so big that they are having to split it up into 2 care groups.
Wow.
Yeah. So they're they're really taking off, and it's so great for the families that, live in the places, like Wisconsin, where there isn't really an active duty military installation. And so they're removed from that military community. So we have our care teams. We have a TAPS magazine that goes out quarterly. It's filled with articles written by our survivors, written by experts in the field of grief. There are book reviews for folks, they're looking for literature to help them on their grief journey. And we do reviews of books so that we can kind of pick through the hits and the misses for them, information about upcoming events that we do. And that goes out not only to our survivors, but also the folks who support us, our sponsors, caregivers who work with these families, anyone who is registered on our website. And they're great magazines. We've had families that, say that they hold on to them for years, and they'll, at Christmas time, they pull out all of their Christmas magazines, and they go through them because it's just a nice reminder, how to get through the holidays, those sorts of things. So they're really a great resource for our families. And then we also have Team TAPS, which is our running group. Marie Campbell is the director of Team TAPS, and her husband died in the Khobar Towers back in the 90s. And she wanted to run a marathon one year. And so her and another widow ran it. And from there, just kind of like Bonnie starting out TAPS in the very beginning, from there, it just kind of grew. And so she ran in honor of her husband, and over the next 15 years, it has grown into it's huge. We have teams of runners that run the Marine Corps Marathon. And I wish I had the numbers, but our numbers are huge, the folks that run for us. And it's really great because they can run in honor of their loved one. Some people are not runners. I did the Army 10 miler a couple of times. And then after that, I thought, this is not for me. But we have folks that, veterans, we have active duty service members, just athletes in general that come to us and say, I'd really like to do this, but I don't have, a loved one that's passed away. And so we connect them with a family and request permission that they can run in memory of their family. So it's really nice. So for those families that, are not runners, or they're too old and their knees aren't holding up so great, we can connect them with someone who wants to run in memory of their service member. And so it's really neat. We have, they wear a TAPS racing top, and on the back we have a photo of the person that they're running for. And so it's really neat. I know when I ran the Army 10 miler, I would have people running up behind me saying, God bless, Dan Gabrielson, or thank you for your sacrifice, and just things like that. And I'll tell you, when you're at mile 8 and you just want to be done, it's those kinds of things that
keeps you going.
Yeah. So the Team TAPS, the Run and Remember, is really, really great. And another way for folks that aren't necessarily survivors or active duty to get involved. And then also one of our huge things that we do is we have a suicide postvention and prevention program, which is run by Kim Rocco. And it's amazing what she does. She's a suicide survivor herself, and she has just created such a huge network of support for our families who have lost loved ones to suicide.
Wow, you have a lot of events, you have a lot of programs going on.
Yeah, and that's just the big ones. We have so many more, but you can find all of that information and more on our website, www.taps.org. It's just really incredible. It's been 20 years, but to come from, Bonnie's kitchen table to where we are now in Washington, D.C., and providing support, over the years for more than 50,000 families and caregivers. It's incredible. And it's an honor to be a part of it.
Well, I am a avid runner, and I will be checking out Team TAPS myself.
Oh, great. Yes, please do.
It sounds really cool. Before we get to the final 3 questions, I also wanted to just take note of all of the people from the highest echelons of the military to people in the film industry, all kinds of stars are really getting behind TAPS. And I think you guys are doing a really good job of getting the support and the backing.
Yeah, it's been a lot of hard work being in the right place at the right time. A lot of just the same way that I became involved in TAPS, is how we've been connected to some of these individuals. General Dempsey, he's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he is one of our biggest supporters. He comes out every year for the last, I think 3 years now. He's come out and spoke to our kids, and he is an entertainer. Let me tell you, he sings to our kids. He takes the words to a popular song that's on the radio, and he changes them. One year he did, "Hey There, Delilah." He changed the words to "Hey There, Taps Kiddos." And it's just, by the time he's done, there's not a dry eye in the house. And it's just really neat to see somebody at that high level be so down to earth. No agenda, just there for the kids. He's incredible. And we've had the same thing with some actors, Jeremy Renner, who was in The Hurt Locker, some other folks, that have been really great supporters of TAPS and helped us to spread the word.
Yeah, that's really great. Okay, Vanessa, are you ready for the final 3?
I think so.
Okay. Number 1, who would you like to hear on a future episode of Veteran Resource Podcast?
I mentioned her name once already, and she works for TAPS, but I just really think that what she does is amazing, and it's Kim Ruako, who heads up our suicide programs, our postvention and prevention programs. Her husband, John Ruako, was in the Marine Corps, and he lost his life to suicide, and he has got to be so proud of her because what she does is incredible. It's really hard to work with some of these kids who've lost their dad, their sibling to suicide. And, anything that we can do to help prevent any other families from having to go through that, I think is so very important. And Kim is the best at what she does. And she is like Oprah. I don't know when she sleeps, but she's traveling all the time, and she's just doing amazing things, and she could tell you so much more than I can. But that's who I would suggest.
I will have to get in contact with Kim for sure.
She's great. She's really, really spectacular.
All right, Vanessa, number 2, what upcoming project has you fired up right now?
This summer is going to be really, really busy for us. We, I mentioned that we do our national seminar in DC. We do our regional seminars throughout the year. We do a suicide-specific seminar in Good Grief Camp every October. But during the summer months, we do what we call Good Grief Campouts. And it's just like it sounds. They are campouts. 3-day, 2-night campouts just for the kids. So the moms, they drop their kids off on a Friday, and they leave them with us for the whole weekend. It's the same kind of idea where, we have a military mentor come out for each of the kiddos. We're in cabins all weekend, and it's just, you think that you've really seen something special in Washington, D.C. over Memorial Day weekend. But imagine that you spend 24 hours a day with these kids for 3 days. And it's just, you think you can't see anything cooler until you've been to one of our campouts. And it's just, they share a cabin, they share meal times for the little kids. It's helping them get their socks and shoes on. And I will tell you, these guys that, these 22, 23-year-old guys that are in the Marine Corps, watching them run these little 4, 5, 6-year-olds around all day, it is just, I'll give you one guess as to who's more tired at the end of the day.
It's like an all-day obstacle course.
It is. These little kids run these guys ragged, and it is so fun to watch them. So we have 5 of them this summer. We start out in North Carolina, And then we go from there to Camp Pendleton, to Seattle, Colorado, and Tennessee. So we have 5 stops this summer, and we're looking for mentors for all of those events too. And it's like I said, it's so much fun. It's 24/7, 3 days with these kids, and it's just it's great.
Very cool. Very cool. All right, the last and final question. This is the brain stretcher here. If you woke up tomorrow and you found out that somebody made an anonymous donation of $10 million to your organization, what would you do with it?
Gosh, besides give myself a raise, I think there are so many survivors that, unless we reach out to them over the phone or online, there's only so many of us. Our headquarters is in Washington, D.C. We have a large number of staff that work there. At one time, I worked in a regional office on Fort Hood. My husband and I moved to Fort Bliss, and I opened up a TAPS regional office there. But those were on military installations, and it'd be so great. I mentioned our care teams that meet all over the U.S., and it'd be so great if we could establish offices all over the U.S. and empower our survivors. Because that's really, at the end of the day, after our survivors have attended one of these workshops or one of our events, it's really about empowering them. You can either let the grief journey consume you, or you can use it to empower yourself and to grow yourself and really be a living legacy. So many times I look at what I'm doing and I think, if at the end of the day, I'm doing something that my dad would be proud of, that's all that really matters. So I just think, empowering our survivors, having offices all over the U.S. where these families could go for, support. They could drop in at any time. And, it's great talking to people over the phone and online, but to walk into a room and get a hug from somebody when you're having one of those days. When I worked in the Fort Hood and Fort Bliss offices, it was just that personal contact with these families that really makes so much difference. So that's what I would do.
For all the listeners out there that might have an extra $10 million laying around, I think that this would be a very good place to put it. And for that person with the $10 million, or for anybody else that wants to get in contact with you or with TAPS, how can they do that?
Our website is www.taps.org, and TAPS is the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, so it's TAPS. And then our hotline, our 24-hour, 7-day-a-week phone number is 1-800-959-8277, or TAPS. So those are the 2 best ways to get a hold of us. And we would love, love, love to meet our 500 mentor mark. So they can email mentors@taps.org if they're interested specifically in the mentor program. And I will get back to them and give them all the information that they need to know. We've written letters for folks to put in their, a TDY request, so they don't have to take personal leave time, because we know these guys, and girls, the time that they give to us is time away from their families, and we all know how important that time with their families is. So anything that we can do to help them out and get them there is we'll do it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for this interview. I've learned so much about TAPS today, and from the sound of it, there's so much more that I could be learning about TAPS. So thank you for at least scratching the surface with me today.
To be continued, right?
Exactly. We'll have to do this again.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to share.
As Vanessa mentioned during the interview, they are still in need of about 150 mentors for the upcoming event. So if you're in the Baltimore, D.C., Virginia area, and you are in the military, or you're a veteran, or maybe even a DoD civilian, she said they could be making exceptions, make sure you send an email over to mentors@taps.org, and I will have information and all of the links in the show notes as well. The show notes will be at veteranpodcast.com /007. Thank you, and we'll see you in episode 8.